Hello everybody, this is Eric Pistelli from Manticore, and in this video I want to show you how to use Cerbero during CTFs. I've been using Cerbero during CTFs in the past, and I've been playing CTFs lately just to see which aspects of Cerbero I can improve and work on. And I'm not going, of course, to talk about all the features in Cerbero because there are too many, but I want to talk about the most important ones when playing CTFs. I'm not going to talk about them in a particular order, just the first which come to my mind, and we'll proceed from there. So the first thing which comes to my mind, of course, is that Cerbero supports many file formats, and this is useful for many reasons, of course, during CTFs, especially in forensics challenges. We have often the case, like this one, in which we have some data appended at the end of the file. Now, Cerbero shows you, for most file formats, file ranges. You can see them here in the hex editor, also in this range bar. The white part is the part of data which belongs to the file. If we go to the end where we see this small red stripe, we can see some foreign data. This data doesn't belong to the full file format, and so we have already reached the next step in our CTF challenge. So this is a very simple feature, of course, but it's very useful during CTF challenges, especially the forensics ones. So the next important aspect of Cerbero, which is worth mentioning, of course, Cerbero has a hex editor, and it has the Ghidra native UI, and it has Carbon disassembler. So I've been playing CTFs lately, also involving reverse engineering, and I've been using the Ghidra UI, but also Carbon. Carbon is the native disassembler in Cerbero, and the main advantage of Carbon is very fast. So if I click on the disassembler, it will produce the disassembly almost instantly, and this is very useful not just for malware triage but also during CTFs if we want to look up something very fast. I just click on the file, open it, take a look at the disassembly. And also one thing which I like about the disassembly is that compared to Ghidra and to IDA Pro, it is very raw. And of course, this is a limitation in most cases, but it's also very useful if I want to read the disassembly, the raw disassembly, and understand it. Then I find it easier to read in Carbon than in other tools. But of course, this is your choice. It's worth mentioning, what I did most of the time is switching between Ghidra and Carbon, and that was the combination, the winning combination for me at least. One other thing which is worth mentioning is that Cerbero contains a JavaScript debugger, and this is very useful during malware analysis. And if you watch some of the other videos I put on YouTube, then you can see how I extract from PDFs JavaScript which is obfuscated, deobfuscated, and even debug it. And in this case, we just have some obfuscated JavaScript. And one thing I want to show you is, the first thing which is very important to notice is the use of actions in Cerbero. So actions are represented by this icon in the toolbar, and they are triggered by Ctrl R. If you press Ctrl R, they are context sensitive. So if I'm in the hex editor, I will have different actions than when I'm, for instance, in a text editor. So if I select all this data in the hex editor, I want, in this case, to have it opened in a text view because I want to process it as text. So what I do is Ctrl R, and I press on this action, bytes to text. At this point, the codex is already correct, UTF-8. And now we have our JavaScript. We can select the language highlighting, and this looks already nicer. The second step is that we want to use an action to beautify this JavaScript. So again, Ctrl R, and in this case we have beautify JavaScript. If I select some text in a text editor, it will beautify just the selected part, but since I didn't select anything, it will beautify the whole thing. So let's beautify. And at this point, we can see at the end that it's just we can see that it's basically text processing and then calling evil. So what we do is we trigger the debugger. Again, if we press Ctrl R and we press on the debugger, we can decide whether to just debug the whole text or just the select part. In this case, I didn't select anything, so the debugger will, the dialog will prompt with the whole text, which was in the text editor. So we press OK, and at this point, one feature which is very useful in the debugger is that evils, when it tries to execute an evil, the debugger will ask us. We can change this behavior, but for our purposes, it's perfect. So we just run basically the script, and it will pop a dialog, the first call to evil, and we can see even by this script that it's just some text processing, and at the end it's calling evil again, so we execute again. And again we have some text processing we can see at the end, and again an evil call. We press again, and again some text processing, and at the end an evil call. And we can execute this again. And at the end we reach some different result, and this is actually the script which is being executed at the end. And we can go back to Cerbero, we open a new text editor, again we do this through an action, we paste our script, we select the language as JavaScript, we beautify it, and at this point we have still some obfuscation in it. For instance, the strings are just hex encoded. The script is very small, we can do this by hand. Of course, we can just go on a string, and since we have a Python interpreter, we can just use that to decode our strings one by one if we have a very small script. But if the script is larger, of course, we can use what I do most of the time. I just use the built-in script dialog. While we can trigger an action with Ctrl-R, the script editor is triggered by Ctrl-Alt-R. So if we run that, I have already a small script to deobfuscate basically hex-encoded strings. And if we run that, it will just print out the result in the output string. I could have set it here in the text editor as well, and we can just paste it here. And at this point we have already much more readable result. One thing which is worth mentioning is that in the script I get the text of the current view from the API provided by Cerbero. Of course, I could have just pasted the whole script in here using a multi-line string in Python and process that. This is not necessary. If you don't know the API, you don't need to write this part. You can just, again, put the string in here and print it out. But this is how I did it. And this is also very useful. One thing which is also very useful is that if there's not just a debugger, you have also a way to run JavaScript here directly. So if I write, for instance, print as JavaScript code, I can just use this action to run this JavaScript code. And this is useful if you have some text processing or something like that and you just want to see the end result of it without using the debugger. It can be very useful. Or if you want to perform some, if you have a CTF challenge which involves actually running some JavaScript to perform the, let's say, the generation of the flag, you can just write the JavaScript here and execute it directly. I do that sometimes, but to be honest, I hate JavaScript, so I usually just rewrite it in Python. But okay, this is about taste. Well, again, if you like JavaScript, you have the wrong taste. No, I'm just kidding. But again, you can do whatever you want. Sometimes I write the JavaScript and just run it here. So what else? Actions, yeah, actions are not yet finished. What else do we have here? Very important, yeah. we have some actions which are essential. For instance, if you have, like we had before, I unfortunately don't have anymore the, but I can get it from the history here. So if you have, for instance, an encoded string, which is often the case, like this in text, and we have it just as hex characters without the escape. Yes, it often happens that we have this kind of strings in CTFs, and if you want just to convert it and have it in the hex editor, what you can do is you can go here and do hex string to bytes, and it will open a text view, hex view, sorry. And at this point, I will show you in a moment, once you have a hex view, which is essential if you want them to perform more modifications on the data, more processing. This is valid also for base 64. So if you have a base 64 string, you can just base 64 to bytes, and it will actually open you a text view. What do I have with this text view? No, it will open a hex view, and at that point, via the hex view, you can process data. You have some more text actions for lowering the case, for stripping white spaces, for doing uppercase. You can open an empty hex view, you saw already, open new text view, and you can indent XML, which is also useful. And now that I mentioned the actions, which there aren't that many, we can focus on another part which is much more important, which are filters. Filters are used for many things, and I will show you in a second. So filtering works always from hex view. Oh wow, I said hex view for the first time. What you do is you select the data you want to filter. So in this case, we can select the whole data, Ctrl A, and then we press Ctrl T. Now, or we can of course use the toolbar. In the toolbar, sorry, not in the toolbar, in the context menu. See, I just postponed my error. In the context menu, the filter are represented here. So you can just open filter, and filters are basically, well, they're filters. You can select an operation and decide which, man, this is difficult to describe. No, you can basically select what you want to do with the data on the left. You can convert it, for instance, to base 64, and at that point you will have it in base 64. Or you can stack filters. In this case, okay, we have a base 64, we want back to hex, and if we do that, we go back to hex. So we can have multiple filters stacked upon each other, and we can do many operations which are very basic. For instance, we can hex, we can do hex, we can do XORing, or all kinds of operation on bytes, on, for instance, very simple. Every 2 seconds in a CTF you have to XOR some data. So you want to XOR, for instance, with CC. So we XOR with CC. If we XOR again with CC, we go back to the original data. And to be honest, XOR is the default because it's also the most used operation, but as you can see, there are many operations you can perform, and you can perform them on a byte level or on a word, dword, qword level. You just have to separate the data, for instance. In this case, we can do it like this. And now we have XOR with 2 different bytes. You can also have some, I don't use them often, but you can even have some conditions. So you can specify CC, XOR with CC, if the byte is different than, for instance, I don't know, 3C, let's say. We can see it didn't XOR the first byte because it didn't meet our condition. And every which is also important, every filter does have also can have not it's not mandatory, but it can have a range. So if we select some data and we add, we can specify to just use the selection. Now it will see only the selected part, and it will keep the left and right part. As we can see, it just sorted the part which I selected. If we select a part on the left and then add the filter, we can decide to trim the data or not. If we trim the data, we will actually not retain the left and right part. So this is also very useful. If we trim left and right, what happens is we have just sorted the table word, and everything else, the rest is gone basically. So this is the basic filter. It contains mathematical operations which you can perform again on the various types, and you can even specify the endianness. So it's a very useful filter, one of the most useful ones. Copy is just a copy filter, just copies the data. It can be useful if you just want to copy a part of it. This is useful when you stack filters and you just want to copy one part or a selected range. It's usually, I mean, you won't probably ever use it, but just to mention it. Replace is also very useful. This filter makes it possible to replace certain characters even with nothing. For instance, let's say we want to remove the word, the character A from a string. So no, I don't want to use selection, remove selection. And now we can see it removed A from the string. We can specify hex bytes or ASCII characters. We can increase the size. Of course, we can even put 2 characters instead of 1. That will also work. In this case, even 3, because I put a space, of course. And this is very useful because it happens often that you want to remove some character during text processing. Then you have the from base64 filter. Of course, you can use the action we have. This is a repetition, basically. It's redundant, but it is useful sometimes to do it from a text view and sometimes from a filter. So you can do it from here as well. You've seen it already. From hex converts from a hex string. To hex converts to a hex string, for instance, as we can see. These some filters I will not go into the details because they're not really that common. We have basically all hashes. So if we want, for instance, to hash with SHA-1 this data, now we have a hash of it. You can compress and decompress using various filters. This is extremely useful in forensics challenges if you want to decompress using zlib or some other algorithm. You have the parameter for raw if you want to decompress from, for instance, a zip file. And you have encryption and decryption algorithms, AES, RC4. And you have disassemblers, for instance. Let's open maybe something which is actually binary, otherwise it's difficult to show you. Let's go into the section with code here. So if we open here some code, well, we select some code and we just say, okay, I want it, wait, I have to trim the data here actually. I want to see the x64 of it. Now it shows me the x64 disassembly. This is also sometimes useful in CTFs. And again, we have many many disassemblers we have for ARM, basically all the ones supported by Capstone and all the ones of managed code like the DEX, not decompile disassembler, ActionScript 3, and Java, and of course .NET MSIL. So this can also be useful during CTF competition. One filter which I often use is the development array converter. It basically converts some data in an array in a language you specify. Let's say you want an array in C, and now you have the array with the data in C. And this is very useful during CTFs because you have sometimes data you want to process and you want to do it either in C, or you want to do it, for instance, in Python or in Java, and you just convert it to the array in that language, copy it, and there you are. Other two filters which are worth mentioning are the custom and the loop, but these are, to be honest, these are not very useful during CTFs. They are more useful during malware analysis. These are filters used to perform some custom data processing which is not provided by the filters already present here. So if you want, for instance, let me show you. This is the custom, and this is the, okay, let's start with this one. This is a very simple loop filter in Lua. They are written in Lua. You write Lua, it's sandbox, it's secure, and for instance, it says if the byte is different than 0 and different than, it's a double condition, which for instance we don't have in the basic filter. If that's the case, then we XOR it with 0xFF. So we don't have a double condition in the basic filter, and we can provide one through a loop filter in Lua. And if you want even more control, you can have the custom Lua filter, which basically it reads one block, processes it, and then in this case just stores it. If you want to process a byte, you can just basically change this single line of code and it writes back the byte in the block, and it will do everything for you. You just have to, it provides already the snippet, you just have to modify one. Of course, if you want to process a word or let's say an integer, then you have to change, of course, the granularity of the read and write parts, but other than that, that's it. You don't have to change anything else. Mentioned filters, mention actions. What else? I don't think I have to. Yeah, one thing which is important still about filters. These Lua filters, for instance, are used when processing mainly files, because filters are not just applied on the fly on data, but they are applied also when you want to load a file. So if, for instance, you have some embedded file and you want to, sorry, I forgot to mention, if you have an embedded file, let's say this file was actually contained in another file, and actually let's make an example out of this. So we have this ELF file, and we XOR it with CC, let's say, okay? And we save the output here on disk. Let's say encrypted. So let's go back to this. Now I could also close this debugger, which is in the way. So now we can open this encrypted file, and let's say this is actually embedded in some other file, maybe appended at the end of another file. So let's say we select this, not even select, we just go at the beginning of it, and we can specify to load this as an embedded file in Cerbero. So we press Ctrl E, or to the context menu we can load as, and now we say child. It doesn't have to have a name, it will just default to custom, and let's say, okay, I know already that this is an ELF file because I analyzed it through filters, and I want to load this file using a filter. So we specify in this dialog, okay, we use the basic filter, we XOR with CC, can even preview it. We see it's an ELF, okay. And now when it loads our file, it will actually decrypt it first. And this is useful for many tasks during analysis, especially during malware analysis. I don't know if it will be useful in CTFs as well, but just to mention it. So that's why actually Lua filters are used, especially for this kind of loading of a child file, because of an embedded file, because usually if you want to just process data in a way that filters are not do not support, you just convert it to an array like I showed you before, and then you just write some Python, Java, or C++ code to process the data. But just to be complete in the explanation. And filters is also important to mention. They are supported from the API in Python. So for instance, if you want to open the API, the documentation of the Python SDK, you can quickly access it from here. Of course, you can even go into docs and then SDK HTML, but here it's easy. You just press Ctrl Alt R and then you just SDK help, and now you have the complete documentation. If we go to the apply filter, so if you want to apply a filter to some data, you just have to first create a container, and to do that you basically create a new container. You specify the size of the container, if you can specify 0, but then you have to also to specify the container resizable through the set resizable. You can just navigate it through, okay, a container returns an empty container. So what you do is you look for, it's not very practical, but you can manage from here, okay, this is the empty container. So in this class you have the set resizable method if you want to increase the size of it, if you don't know from the beginning. Otherwise you just create a container already with the right size, and then once you create the container you can apply filters to it. There are many examples in the official company blog, and I'll post even some more, but there are many and you will find your way through but anyway, just to mention this API, you apply filters but on a container, you specify this string specifies one thing which I completely forgot. It basically contains the filters, and you can export filters from here. You just have to export, and at this point you have here a string which you can use in this API to process data. And that's basically it. It's I don't think I have anything to mention. Again, there are many file formats. I cannot, of course, talk about all of them. One thing which may still be useful mentioning, which is available also here in the analysis view, is that you have a hex view with layouts. So you have, for instance, the possibility to, let's put it here for now, and let's say you have a hex editor and you have some ranges. You can just decide which part of the data is what, and this can be useful when analyzing a file format. And you can of course save this analysis and so on in a project. This can also be useful, just mentioning it. Other than that, I think we covered most of the basics. I'm sure I will be forgetting, I'm forgetting for sure something, but this is what came to my mind in this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you did, if you found it useful. If you think it sucks, you can say that as well, of course. And if you wish me to do a video on a particular topic, you can express that wish, of course. So anyway, till the next time,